Hello everyone, Happy New Year. This is the first video back since after Christmas, and so I'm going to be again a little self-conscious about doing this on camera again. And also I have nothing planned, so this is just going to be talking and playing today. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I suppose I had one idea, which was when you look at the different chords of a key, so C major, all of those in the different inversion. We'll talk about inversions maybe. I'm not sure what I have to say about them. But I wanted to talk, I suppose, about the hierarchy of what the different chords mean and what they're used for. In my mind. This is the great thing about music. I don't have to prove any of this, right? I can just say it because it's fairly subjective. So just because I say this doesn't mean it's true. This is how it feels to me when I listen to music and when I write music or when I improvise. These are the kind of things I'm thinking. The first one is obviously something that is solidified in my experience with the jazz stuff, which is this link between 2, 5, and 1. So D minor, G major, but with a dominant 7 if you want it. You don't need it, but if you do it without, it doesn't make that big a difference. Or with the F. There's a kind of a continuity here. So when you go from D to G to C, it feels like you're on a track home. It doesn't necessarily always have to land at that destination, but a lot of the time it will. Once you hear that D minor, it'll lead back to C. The other thing is, for me, that's kind of one side of the key, weaving around there. A minor, I think, is also part of that. I think when you hear A minor, you can also kind of prelude that. It's like A to D to G to C, so 6, 2, 5, 1. Again, because it's that kind of circle of fifths, it feels like you're pulling off in that direction. So for me, I think you can kind of go backwards in this way, that this is, again, I'll talk about what I think is the other side of the key in a second. But for me, that is the track that takes you back to 1. A lot of the time anyway. So 6 to 2 to 5 to 1. And if you want a satisfying, albeit cliche, where did I put my drill? Cliche chord progression, that's one that's pretty good to use. 6, 2, 5, 1. The other thing I'd say, this is the other thing I wanted to talk about, the other side of the key. So if we're in C major, you hit any of those other chords, it feels like you're kind of within a certain parameter. So if we improvise in C major, you can kind of get a long way just using those 4 chords. As soon as you go to this chord, and you hear it's in a totally different place. So that's the other side of the key I'm talking about, going to chord 4. And I think chord 4 can feel like it leads back to 5, like so. Like that. Because it's very similar to chord 2. It shares a lot of notes. Especially if, we'll talk about minor keys in a sec, but in a major key, if you want to do more jazzy stuff like D minor with a C, that really is literally an F major chord there. I wonder if it would be useful to come closer for this while I'm talking about it. Hopefully the mic's not in the way. Anyway, hopefully that's fine. So, if we're playing a D minor chord, that one there, and we add the C, that really is just an F major chord with a D. So definitions aside, I think, of course, it's going to feel similar. But I think you can use it in a different way, where you've done your chord progressions, your 6s and your 2s and your 5s and your 1s and all of that stuff. And if you want to go, or anything really, to get back to 1, I think if you do that and then you go to the subdominant, that 4 to 1 to 4 to 1 business is this peaceful alternate reality of the key that you can visit if you like. So you have the train track of the key, for me, and you have the peaceful seesaw of backwards and forwards between 1 to 4. And if you ever want to escape the seesaw, you just go to 5. Etc., etc. So, for me, that's why I feel like you can easily do the seesaw between 1 and 4 with the minor. So, that kind of thing. And actually reversing it, I think, is a lovely sound. This reminds me of the Avatar theme. There's a bit of the... It's a bit more modal, like modal minor. Whatever that is, the Dorian mode, I think. Not that I really like modes, but that's what I think that is. So, again, 1 and 4 sounds good. Whether minor to minor, major to major, minor to major, major to minor. They all sound great. It's just visiting and coming back and visiting and coming back. And I think one theory for that is, if we're building, like, I think my brain likes to build things into perfect cadences, regardless of how illogical it might be. I like to try and find the perfect cadences in it. So if we're in C and we go to F, that is automatically a perfect cadence if you want it to be. So if you want to exaggerate the fact that that's a 5, you can just throw in the B flat. And then just get rid of it when you come back, if you want to modulate back. But you don't have to do that. I think that's why it works so well, because it really is visiting what feels like a slightly ambiguous, it's a slightly ambiguous modulation in a way, going to the subdominant. Because going 1 to 4 is the same as going 5 to 1 in this case F. C to F is 5 to 1. But if you put the B natural in, it's just slightly more ambiguous. Etc. So, anyway, in terms of I said a hierarchy, I don't think that's the right word, but I think for me that's the two sides of the key at least. The logical side, this stuff. Your inevitable journey back to 1. No matter how long so this is, you get all these different cadences, interrupted cadences, imperfect cadences. It's all a different way of putting off the inevitable perfect cadence. So, let's go through it. Perfect cadence is a perfect cadence. Interrupted cadence. We go to the minor key. Now, a lot of the time when I hear that, I'm waiting for it to just inevitably resolve anyway. So say we have a bit of music. What do I want to happen next? I want this to happen. So, cheesy. But it kind of, it's a way of putting off the inevitable perfect cadence. Just going to A minor for a bit. will lead you back home eventually. So interrupted cadences lead there. An imperfect cadence is self-explanatory. It needs to resolve at some point. So even if silence, and even if you start the next phrase on the 5 as well. It's like the pull of it wants to take you back to 1. So even if the music resists that pull really strongly and it takes you, so say you have that interrupted cadence, and then you start the next phrase like, you're acknowledging the irresistible pull of that by having to make such a statement there. You know, when you have these interrupted cadences, or imperfect cadences in this case, ending on the 5, you're acknowledging that pull back to 1 because you're saying, I know what you want to happen next. 5, you want to go back to 1. It's just that by not going back to 1, you're making a statement in itself where you say, I know how important it is to go back to 1, and we're choosing not to do that. Or we're choosing to go to 1 of a different key. Kind of. Oh, whatever. I don't know what that was. But you get the idea. It's kind of... The expectation is there for a reason, because that pull is very, very strong. The only different one is, and I think it's because it's the alternate side of the key, is that plagal cadence. You're not missing anything there. That is just simply that lovely seesaw between 1 and 4 coming to a nice satisfying end, and you can leave it there. The 1 is perfectly satisfying. But that's the unique one in my view. That's the one that doesn't mess around with the expectation of 5 to 1. All the others do. So 5 to 1 is 5 to 1. 1 to 5, or anything to 5, is the expectation of 1. An interrupted cadence is the expectation of 1 that has been denied. Because eventually you'll have to have something that resolves somewhere. Happen eventually. Just might not be in quite the place you want it to, right? Anyway, major keys and minor keys are quite similar in this way. Sorry, rapid drink, sorry. So, for me, if you're in a minor key, let's go through the chords and talk about them, because they're far more complicated and dependent on what the hell is going on in the key. So the harmonic minor, I've never really taken that seriously as an actual template for the harmonic minor, because no one is playing the 3rd chord of the key as that, an augmented chord. That's not really a chord in my view in classical music. I mean, it obviously is, but it's a transition point. So you get a lot of this kind of music where this kind of transition. Where the function of that augmented chord is a bridge between 2 other chords, whether descending or ascending or something else more complicated. So you could even have... But the point is, it's kind of path of least resistance, chromatic movement of a chord that is not really a chord that leads to another chord. So there, if you continue the logical step up, it'll lead to a real chord. Or if you continue the logical step for this note downwards, you'll get to a real chord. Or any of the middle notes will lead to a real chord of a different key, a kind of a pivot moment, which can be super cool. That's really nice to do that, and you can continue that on. So something like that. Or to E minor. You can hear how that augmented chord, which is what that is not really a chord in of itself. It needs to go somewhere. Now again, my opinion, loads of composers would say, of course, it's a real chord, and like Debussy uses it, and so do many others, which is true. But I see it as a moment of, what's the word? It's a moment. What's it called? It's a. I can't think of the word, but it's something that goes past, right? It goes past to there. So I don't like that chord 3 in the harmonic minor being that. I treat chord 3 as E flat major. So I'll go through what I think the minor chords are, each version of them as they come up. So 1 is 1, 2 diminished, right? But there's a lot of caveats here. So the diminished chord, great, right? But I think in reality this is going to play out in one of two ways. No, there's more than two. Hang on. So it's going to play out of one of many ways. It's either going to be diminished really as a dominant, like that. It's going to be a diminished 7, half diminished chord. And it's going to function as the 2-5-1. That kind of thing. So the diminished chord. Without the C, it's very weak. It doesn't really nicely lend itself to a cadence. It's fine, but this is so much nicer. So you'll hear that more often, cadentially, that 2 with the half diminished. But I also think you're going to get things like D minor, purely D minor, that leads to G, that leads to C minor. Just like you would in C major. I think you're going to get the A natural. And I'll explain that in more detail later. So say you've got this ascending line in C minor. You will occasionally, that's obviously an F chord, more often than anything else. But it could easily be a... Do you know what I mean? Just as easily as it could be. If it really wants to pull up melodically, the harmony might well, under some situations, allow that to be a D minor chord. See what I mean, right? I threw in a few there. It's almost modal again. It's a particular effect, I think. And D minor will feel like it leads to the G minor, which is certainly again another option we'll get to. So that 2 chord, I think, is a minefield and full of options. They're all options of the 2, and so is. And one I forgot to mention is the Neapolitan 6th, this. I think one of the most beautiful things you can do in a piece of music is flatten the 2nd for the 2 of a cadence. As Schubert, I think I got this from Schubert. Like, I just heard it in Schubert and I was just like, oh, it's spectacular when it works. I've got to remember how it actually works now. It's been a while. So I think the point is, it's that, isn't it? That kind of thing. So say you're in C minor. It's that kind of feeling. There, that D flat. And especially for me. That's something I heard in Britain. Like the Britain War Requiem, there's a moment where there's just that moment. I'm not sure if anything else harmonically is even remotely like that, but there's just that one moment I remember sticking out to me thinking, it's just beautiful, and it's that. Resolving down to there. And I think it's in the same place in the key. It's the Neapolitan sixth. And I think what that does is it really sets up a modulation to the subdominant next if you really wanted to, because then you've got some logical reason to have that D flat. So it's getting a bit heavy theory-wise here, but let's go through it anyway for those who are interested. If we're modulating to the subdominant, we add a flat in every key. So C to F, let's go to major, C to F. C has no flats, F major has one flat, and so it's going to have... And so in order to do that, you want to prep. I just can't find the right angle today. Let's do that. Then at least you can see a bit of my face. You want to prep that B flat somewhere. Which is why the dominant seventh in that kind of situation is very useful. Without it, you get no inkling that the B flat is coming, and so you get the seesaw effect I was talking, 1 to 4. Doesn't feel like a modulation, even though you've gone technically 5-1. But when you do this, now it feels like a modulation. So what have we done there? We've added a flat. Go back to our minor key. C minor has 3 flats. F minor has 4 flats. The D flat, and that's what we're talking about. Well, you can almost see this as a very temporary modulation to a 4 flat key from a 3 flat key. You can call it a modulation to the subdominant in passing, in a way. So say we go again, that beautiful kind of... What we do there, let's talk it through. We get the flat, the D flat. We go down to the cadential 6/4, which is 1, but with the 5 in the bass. It's a C minor chord, but with a G in the bass, which then leads to the true dominant chord, as in just G7, right? And then that leads back to 1. That G7 chord has no D flat. You add the D flat in there, you're into all sorts of murky territory. Kind of Spanish or slightly Middle Eastern. That's where you really got to start thinking about modes. So unless you have to correct it by that point. If you want to stay like in the realm of music theory, I understand anyway, you have to. But your ear is now ready for that new flat key. It's ready for it. So if you do all of that, you've heard the flat. It's unexpected at the time. Again, let's just walk through the... It's so nice, right? It's so nice. And that's the delicate interplay between expectation and subversion of expectation going on, in my opinion. I don't remember exactly what I did, but I can tell you the broad strokes of that. So we're in C minor, we hint at the D flat, we resolve to the 7, the G7, but instead of going to C minor we go to C7, which then pulls us to F minor. We turn that F minor chord again into a Neapolitan 6, and then we can use that as a bridge, because we've done it once, to modulate back to C minor. I just think that's so nice. And then if you want the seesaw effect, that's what it is. C to F. So you can play around with this expectation a lot. There is a lot more of a link between keys than people like to not acknowledge, and it's through, in my opinion, the tonic to the subdominant. And it's not modulating. It's not really modulating. It's that balance between subdominant and tonic, and the ambiguity that automatically gives. So where were we? We'd just done a super big cadence. Then let's say we modulate to C major. If we go to F there, it feels nice. That's the 1 to 4. We can go to... I think that's so nice, because what you're doing is, again, acknowledging that they are kind of two sides of a coin. There, dum, da, da. That's the shadow, right? Or the light. This is the real world. This is the light. Back to the real world. This is the shadow from the light. The minor chord. I just think there's something really to that subdominant thing. Anyway, I probably haven't articulated that very well, and I don't know. I'm pretty sure other people will have thought of this, but let me know your thoughts on all of that if you have any, and if not, thank you for getting this far. So the other thing, I guess, since we're here, let's talk about chromaticism and what it really means, in terms of what it does when we're in a key, or when we're playing a piece. Again, the jazz has got me really thinking about the nature of chromaticism and what it really helps us to do. So we're going to just add a chromatic note each time, just one to the key, and we'll talk about what it wants to do, because they all have different purposes, I think. So we'll start from the top down, because I think there's a general rule of thumb here that is worth acknowledging, which is, let's get this out of the way first, and we'll go major. But I think it's even more applicable in minor. We'll start with the major. A scale is split into two halves, 1 to 5 and 5 to 1. Okay, so this is the safe zone. This is the zone of... I don't even know how to describe it. It's on one level, on one single track, but it's also a very volatile single track that can get derailed at any moment. So this is where the surprises happen. But it's also where you need to go onto that track eventually to get anywhere in a piece. This is like, we're at home, we're going around in little circles, we're on a little play track, you know. At a train station, it's like the... Not that this is a real thing. It's the train that goes round in circles and never goes anywhere. As soon as we get up to here, I feel like we're into exciting territory. And the chromaticism, first of all, is all open for you. The chromaticism up here is all acceptable, and it doesn't have to mean anything in terms of tonality. That can all guide us away from the key and back to the key, no problem, because of the link between the dominant and the subdominant. So I'll talk about that in a sec. The chromaticism in this area is much more inaccessible, and it means something much more strongly. So this is just broadly speaking, and again, my opinion. So feel free to tell me it's all rubbish. It might well be, but for me, modulating up to the dominant is a huge statement in comparison to moving to the subdominant. I'll show you the two modulations. That's to the subdominant. This is modulating to the dominant. That is a much bigger use of it. There's kind of energy there. You've got to really expend. You've got to expend energy getting up to the F sharp. Going just to the B flat. It's like, okay, let's just go here. But then we're coming back down to C. It's such an easy step back home. Eventually, you kind of have. You can also already see that kind of sighing away that leads us back home. Once you're into G, though, the sighing away, it exists and it's cool, but I just feel like it's not quite as built into the key. Like this movement doesn't sound anywhere near as normal or expected as. And then just the fall back home, right? And even you can just overcome it there, so you've got the potential energy just to get back home. Anyway, so first of all, we're going to go through it one note at a time. That's what I think the B flat means. That note means we're going to the subdominant. Like almost 90% of the time, or more, almost 100% of the time. That's bang, F. And if it's not, it's acknowledging there is an expectation it's going to F. So if you don't want to go to F, it's going to be a huge, massive change. It's not going to sit right, you know. Say you want to do a diminished chord. That's pretty nice. But it's still playing with the expectation that it's really just this you want. At least in my mind it is. That's definitely a thing, by the way, which we'll talk about in a sec. Other options for this chord? Going there is possible. But so forced. Definitely far more possible in the minor key. So. In the minor key, it's a different story entirely, because it's nowhere near as big a shift. So, in a major key, that is subdominant. That's where it's taking you. This one is a lovely note, because there's two things it does regularly in a major key. One, the most common, it pulls you up to the relative minor. So you hear this chromatically. It's taking you to A minor. I'll show you that with some harmonies though. That's what that G sharp really wants to do. And that's what it's going to be used for most of the time. Am I recording this? Yeah, good. The other thing it's going to be used for is that lovely pendulum effect, or seesaw. Pendulum is nicer than seesaw as a metaphor. Going to the subdominant, but the minor form. And so you're going to see that quite often because it's such a nice note. And it's also, coincidentally, the note that is used in those Barry Harris scales. For that sense of ambiguity. Perfect cadences in all directions. In jazz, that's 5-1 in both A minor and C major, repeating over and over and over again. Or an A minor, you know. Anyway, not talking about jazz right now. So, when you hear that note, that is one of two things. And they're both really great and super useful to know. So, overcoming the hump, that's like the speed bump. Overcoming it and going back over to A minor. Or not having enough energy and using it as a turning round point to bring us back to C via because that energy in the key of C major as the dominant of F minor really wants to just come back to that G. To go to the B flat. It feels like I'm going to show you this. Going up that scale from the C, you're fighting a losing battle. In a very beautiful way. In music, you're fighting a losing battle. As an atmosphere, rather than kind of theoretically a losing battle. It's great to do this. But it's the effect is what I mean. So what you expect is give up straight away. Wants to come straight back down to the G. You want to keep fighting that battle going up. You're going to give up eventually. You might end up a little higher, but you're going to have to expend a huge amount of energy. And then you get the really beautiful stuff with the false relation where you can't overcome the E flat. There's no logical place for that to go next. You can't go up without breaking the spell. Again, you can do what you want, but for me, that breaks the spell slightly. The logical progression for me is there, then back down, and back down again. Dominant, struggling. And eventually, if you keep going to the logical kind of place of the key, you're back home. Happy times, you know. It's all of this crazy stuff up here, you know. Starts off with that first speed bump. That's the easy route, the hard route. And at any moment you can just give up. You're eventually gonna find that that's your happy place, you know. Anyway, so that's what that note does. The F sharp is, and by the way, all of these notes, you listen to Mozart, Mendelssohn, Chopin, they're used as in super duper clever ways that I don't always understand, as ornaments and also preparations for key changes. So you'll hear this kind of like, right? So that's Mozart, right? I can't remember what key we're actually in, but it's that effect. The F sharp isn't in the key. It's just saying the harmonic language that we're using has inbuilt moments of playfulness and ambiguity that could at any moment turn into something far more serious. So but it could easily, that's a harmonic, that's a tool for modulation, that's serious harmony. C major. you can use those kind of movements to seriously modulate, but you can also use them just to go. And they mean nothing, right? So I think if you want to hear how clever this stuff can be, and you want to hear how chromaticism can be used masterfully, listen to some... I think Mendelssohn is really, really, really good at it, honestly. I feel like Mendelssohn is great at it. Because I think he's more explorative, but I feel like Mozart also does it really well. And Mozart errs on the playful side. Like, you'll hear those moments. And they will occasionally, most of the time they will just be playful, but they'll occasionally turn into something serious. And then it's like worth studying. How did he do that? And I have no examples to show you, but they do exist. So that note, that was a bit of an aside because that can apply to any of these notes, that playful chromaticism. But in terms of what it does to our key of C major, the obvious answer is takes us to the dominant. And it's a huge struggle, in my opinion, to do that. So it just feels like it doesn't quite sit right, especially ascending. It's not a very nice scale to hear. You've got to come from far lower. So I think you've already got to prepare that if you're in your safe zone. It's like you have to go through the feeling that you've made a misstep somewhere. That feels like a misstep to me. Even the most logical way of approaching it in the safe area of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from above the semitone doesn't feel right at all, and approaching it from below is very clumsy because you've got to acknowledge there's an F and an F sharp, and so you've got to do some serious groundwork for that to work. You've got to figure out a way of introducing these ideas early, again through playful harmony or chromaticism, if that's how you're going to get to the dominant. So I think there's always better ways to get to the dominant. I think you can get to the dominant by coming from it. How? So if you're wanting to land on G major, I think I just don't like going to G major very often, to be honest, from C. I just don't think it sounds that great. It always feels slightly forced. Yeah, I won't talk about how I get there because I can't think for now. I might go there via like D minor or something ridiculous. But I don't know how. No, I just... What is it? Okay, we'll talk about that in a sec. So I think I remember how I have done it in a few pieces. Anyway, the F sharp is going to be the integral part of the dominant chord of G in this case. So it's the secondary dominant, basically. The dominant that leads to the dominant. D7 to G, except we're modulating to G. So it's just the dominant of the new key. 5, 1. You'll also hear it in conjunction with another black note that we'll talk about to go to the mediant. You'll often hear that. Or you'll hear it as a pathway to get to this note. So you'll hear. Pretty cool. Although a little bit scrappy to get there. You might hear something. You might hear something like that potentially. So rather than the D sharp, you might hear it as a D chord. And again, that's using this note to get to overcoming the hump. Not the one that goes where you're giving up. That the F sharp doesn't lead to that one at all. Anyway, so you'll also, I think that's a nicer use of the F sharp as part of the B7 chord that leads to E minor. Right, so that's how I see it. So you can use it in two ways, but they both serve the same kind of purpose, and they're both not very nice in isolation, I think. It's too hard to use that note melodically without it being playful and Mozartsy in a kind of a cliche way. This note, the E flat. Remember, just because I'm talking in C major doesn't mean the principles don't apply to any key. So when I'm saying E flat, I'm talking about the flattened third of a major key. Right? That E flat is, again, one of two things, and I think they're both quite nice melodically as well. So it's less of a barrier to get to the E flat than it is to the F sharp. There's a much easier way to get to the Z flat because you can just walk. That, no effort at all to get there. Melodically, very nice. So say we were in a C major. You can pivot, you know, you don't even have to do correct harmony there. It's just tonic major, tonic minor, interchangeable in certain circumstances very easily. So I think that's where you're going to hear it most. And in particular, leading from a D or falling from an F, either fine. Because it's such nice contrast, the 5, obviously dominant can lead to major or minor. The dominant is the same in both. G7 can either lead back to C major with an E natural, or it can lead to C minor with an E flat. And that's basically the logic I'm using here. Either works. The other one, which is the one I showed you before, is this kind of way of getting to... Again, it's overcoming the barrier. So when you sharpen it, you're overcoming a barrier to get to the next note. So if we go back, this one, that's a huge barrier to overcome. A sharp, in this context, is going to mean F sharp 7 leading to B minor, which is almost impossible to do elegantly. It'll work occasionally. You've got to really kind of go crazy with that though. So that barrier, I think, is almost, that speed bump is huge. That's much easier to fall back. Like that. This one, easy to get over. Really nice in the key. This one, possible, but not very pleasant. It's possible. I just don't like the melody line of this one. But this is a very hard one to pull back from, so I'm going. Because really what that is kind of thing. But coming, obviously, like going from there to... or anything. I mean, it's just nonsensical, really. It's that, I think, so. Using that as, you know, something that you can't get over, but you know the opposite side of the coin where you kind of... You can hear the harmony already made on those ones. But this one just doesn't work. It probably does, but you've got to be a really good musician to make that work, and I don't think I'm good enough to use that very well. Maybe it's more like... Anyway, I'm kind of overcomplicating this. So it's this kind of duality of each black note. Is it something you overcome to get to the other side? Or is it something that you pull back, that you don't overcome? And they all have the possibility, but some are much easier. So this is one that you don't overcome, this is one you pull back from. This is one that is equally nice with both. Or you come back. This is one you overcome. But maybe not totally, that's like a fairly bumpy speed bump, right? This one, again, is one that is ambiguous, just like this one. These two. These are the two that define, by the way, major and minor. So if you replace both of these notes, then you'll have a minor scale. So I think there's a reason why these two are the nicest accidentals in a way. And the ones that give you the most possibilities. So this E flat. It's nice as a one that you don't overcome. You come back from, like so. And like I said before, it's also just really nice to play from major to minor. But it is also one that you can overcome to get to the median. So say you're going... It's pretty nice. And you can use that to continue to the... like so. So you can do something like... right? Does that make sense? So none of these possibilities feel to me like we're straying too far from C major, and I think that's what I wanted to lay down, that when we're doing these little turns, it's kind of the expectation that we can come back home at any point. The ones that work, right? The ones that don't require a lot more prep. So we'll go through in a sec which ones work and which ones don't. So the only black note left. And this is again a really, I love this one. Either the sharpened supertonic, which leads to... sorry, the sharpened tonic, which leads to D minor, right, in this case. And it's so nice to get there. I'll show you why it's so nice. So we take a C major chord, the tonic chord. We turn the C into C sharp. Ready-made dominant. Just put the A in the bass. That's the ready-made dominant of D minor. Zero kind of wind resistance there, really. So easy to do. Just like the dominant, we turn the G to a G sharp. It's exactly the same. So there's two sides of the key function in the same way. The tonic, turn the C to a C sharp. It'll pull you towards the supertonic, easy peasy, like so, right? If you go from the 5, you sharpen the G sharp, it'll pull you to the relative minor, really easy too. So those two chords also have escape paths to really nice places, like so. So that's the usual way you'll see that used in C major. The C sharp will take you to D minor, or to D major, which will take you to G. But I just think it sounds bad, so. Like so. It's just a bit rubbish to me. Like too many sharps all at once. But it is technically possible. You can also use it as an escape, just like, not an escape, as the flattened supertonic. The Neapolitan sixth. But with more care, you've got to be super careful. It's really, you're going to hear that when we're modulating to F minor as part of. It is possible, and but it's much harder to get back to C major comfortably. Anyway, this has got far more complicated. I haven't really thought about this in this much depth before, but you got a major scale. B flat is a B flat, basically, and it'll pull you towards the A. Now, this is what I'm trying to say. If it's a B flat, it'll pull you down. If it's an A sharp, it'll pull you up. But they come with baggage, so the B flat can just be a B flat. If you just play a B flat, the rest of it will sound great. Pardon me. If you play this as just an A sharp, it's going to sound super weird. is like the world's craziest mode that it doesn't really work or exist in any music that I know. But again, someone make it work, please, and I'll be super happy. You've got to acknowledge there that the difference being, of course, that A sharp means that you can't have an A, B flat means you can't have a B. But that's the difference, right? Sounds great. And pulls you automatically towards that chord. But this one comes with all sorts of baggage and it just doesn't work. So the A sharp is kind of off limits unless you want to be super clever. If you take this A flat, works nicely as an A flat. So that comes back down. It also works nicely as a G sharp. And you can change mid scale, so you can go, or you can even do the melodic minor. It still works nicely. Or you can do the F sharp and the G sharp, and that'll also work nicely. There's some kind of continuing movement of tension. So the G sharp is great. On all accounts, it'll take you in any direction. And the main reason for that is that using it as the A flat, although it seems like you've gone to a remote key, it seems like you've gone from no sharps or flats to 4 flats. C major to F minor. What you've got to remember is there's a direct link, a direct cut that takes you through that, which is that C major is the dominant of F minor. So you're tricking your brain into thinking there's more of a link in that moment than there is. And there is a link. But just not in the way that you might expect at that time. So doesn't sound weird, right? Even though you are technically jumping a huge gap in the circle of fifths. It's the major minor problem, basically. It kind of complicates things. So you can go from 0 sharps and flats, C major, quite easily to F minor, which has 4 flats because of the dominant always being major. So the dominant is major, C major, apart from the B flat. Right. Anyway, the F sharp, treat it as a G flat, and you're absolutely lost at C because you're going from no amount of tricking or cutting across the circle of fifths is going to help you here. So if you're treating it as a G flat, what you've really got is the craziest scale known to man, basically. And again, just not logical to listen to, so that's probably not going to be a G flat. Because having a G flat comes with all sorts of baggage. The closest you can get with G flat is this. Takes a lot of preparation though to make that D flat chord from C major. The best I can think of to make that D flat chord and the G flat sound good is to go through F minor, the 4 flats, F minor, throw in the D flat, and then do the Neapolitan sixth of G flat, of F minor. That's the closest I can get. I think that does actually work pretty well, but it's just complicated. So C major to the dominant, as in C7, leads to F minor, establish F minor, go to the Neapolitan sixth, resolve in F minor, and then somehow weave your way back. It's actually really nice, but it's a huge journey, and it doesn't cut it just in the G flat. You've also got to establish all sorts of other tricks. So you've got to establish that that's your scale. And then you've got to establish that just for one moment, this is your scale. pretty cool. But again, it takes a lot of work. So, as in the Neapolitan 6, the flattened supertonic of F minor. That leads to the cadential 6/4 there. And then you can mess around to find a way to come back. Which is really nice. Anyway, it works as a G flat with a lot of effort. It works much easier as an F sharp, and you can hear that straight away in the scale, so you don't have to change anything. It's just a G scale. So any of the scales that work without any other modifications, you know you're onto something easy. So you know that works as a B flat, because it's an F major scale. You know it works with an F sharp, because eventually you'll notice it's just a G major scale. So the F sharp works because it pulls you to G very easily. The E flat, if you don't do anything apart from the E flat, it'll sound fine. It'll sound like a C minor melodic ascending scale. Something you hear every day in a minor key. So that's why that's an easy transition as well, because they share so many chords. You can have all of the same chords apart from the E flat. Apart from the E natural. Any chords that have an E natural you won't have, but in C minor you'll have the rest of them. You'll have ones with A flat, A natural, sorry. Occasionally you'll have ones with B natural all the time. It'll just feel a bit more modal. But the E flat is not going to scupper the feeling that that's like a valid scale. Whereas as a D sharp, again, you're onto something slightly weird. You're into some cool E Phrygian, or I don't know what the hell it is, some weird. So it kind of works, but it's much easier to make that work if you also had an F sharp. So for the D sharp to work, and it does, you've got to add minimum F sharp. And if you really want it to work, you can add the C sharp. And if you really, really want it to work, you can add the G sharp. And again, it's lots of effort. So just the D sharp by itself doesn't really cut it. The F natural doesn't help us much. The F sharp, though, helps us a lot. And it helps us with the chords too, so I needed the F sharp for those chords. The C sharp helps us because it helps rise. The G sharp helps us because it pulls us to an even more kind of normal part of the key. It'll pull us towards A minor through some effort. So if you go... to A minor eventually, and then from there it's an easy journey back to C major. Again, it's those journeys and then finding an elegant way back that makes music sometimes so beautiful. I think Schubert does this so well. So the journey away, and then the appearance. It's always been easy to get back. You know, we've taken the scenic route, we take the short route back. So I've never done this in a piece, but say we're in. And we end up on this like G chord, and so we start to do some augmented thing. You can see how you get these escape options from your key and escapes back using these little tricks that I need to use more often, basically. So that can be a D sharp that leads you to the E, and if it leads to the the E is the dominant of the relative minor, and the relative minor is very easy to get back to the relative major, obviously. So those connections are all logical, but doing it in one go is less logical, so you've got to prepare it. Okay, so we talk about that as a D flat. Again, it takes some preparation. Less preparation than this is a G flat. This is a D flat. It's a little easier because you can just say we're in F minor for a moment. So before I come back to C major. So this D flat works, but probably will need a bit of prep from an F minor chord or something. That kind of thing. It works very, very, very well as a C sharp though. And once you end up in D minor again, it's an easy journey back. Because D is 2, leads to 5, which is G, leads to 1, which is C. Okay, so does that kind of make sense? I don't know if that made sense or not, but these are all... First of all, they serve 2 or more purposes, but I like to think of them as serving 2, where they act either as the dominant 7th of a key, in this case. Basically, I think of how they relate to our key of C minor, and which of those chords, these chords, or this one if we want to use the F minor, because I think it's so easy to use. Which of those chords do we have access via the black notes? So the B flat gives us access to F major and F minor. The A sharp doesn't help us with any of those chords, so we leave it alone basically. Kind of leaves us to crazy diminished B chord, which is never really needed. I guess you could do that, to be honest, but it's just not really ever necessary, not something I've noticed has been necessary anyway. So we don't really treat it as an A sharp because it doesn't help us access any of the chords of C major. This A flat helps us access F minor, which I do think is an important part of C major. And it also helps us access A minor, which is an incredibly important part of C major, the key. Helps us access that via the G sharp, the leading note. The F sharp doesn't help us really access, I mean, as a G flat, it's a nice tool in F minor, but that's too many steps removed from C major. It's a novelty in F minor, but F minor itself is a novelty of C major. So you're already down the rabbit hole at that point. So I like to think that this doesn't give us access as a G flat to anything useful in the key of C major. But as an F sharp it does. It leads us to G major, which is of course one of the most important parts of the key. Just not one that I aesthetically like very much going to. Because I think it's been done a cajillion times, going to the dominant via the F sharp. Okay, so the E flat. Again, I do think like a C minor chord is an important part of C major, the tonic minor. I do think it's important to acknowledge that that's an option when you're in C major. Just throwing in a C minor chord occasionally and coming back. Like so. So as an E flat it's important. It helps us go to the dark side, you know. As a D sharp it also gives us access to this E minor chord as a modulation, right? So you throw in the D sharp and an F sharp too. So that F sharp really helps us with 2 things. Leads us to E minor. A C sharp again leads us to 2. That's the only real way we can modulate to D minor from C minor, C major, sorry. With that kind of dominant, that's a leading note. As a D flat, it doesn't help us very much, you know. Kind of gives us another route into F major, I suppose, via the subdominant minor of F major, or the normal subdominant of F minor, or the Neapolitan 6th of C minor. And again, I'm relating all of these back to our key of C major. How accessible is it from C major to do these things? In that case, like fairly, but not as accessible as just using it as the C sharp that goes to the D minor. So, I mean, for me, that kind of makes sense. Makes fairly logical sense that these are tools to get us to chords in the key of C major, and the chords that you believe are part of the key of C major don't have to be too dogmatic. Does it sound nice? Like, if C minor sounds nice occasionally when you're in a C major key, then treat it as something that you might want to use as a tool, and then think, what are my chromatic notes here in a chromatic scale? If I just throw one of them in, is that a simple, elegant way to throw in a C minor chord, which I think will be effective? Yes, so just do it. You know, because you can swivel at any point back to C major, so you might as well throw in a C minor chord every now and then. Anyway, I have never formalized that, but I think that's how I treat chromaticism in my own pieces. Kind of gateways. Yeah, okay. How long have I spent talking about this? A long time. Now the thing is, I can't really improvise effectively using this logic. I have to do it via composition, which takes me a really long time, and it happens fairly organically and without me thinking about it as directly as I just have. So, unfortunately, I can't show you anything really great that will demonstrate that too much, but I feel like some of the examples I gave were okay. Oh my goodness, I'm so tired. Let's leave it there. I know that was a lot of fairly deep dives into theory. Some fairly deep dives into some pretty kind of weird personalized theory that I've got that might not be applicable to anyone else. But yeah, it was useful for me at least to articulate how I think it works. Just so you know, I'm going to be learning the Ravel Sonatine next. I'm going to continue with composition. I'm going to learn a Beethoven sonata, one in A flat. I might have already said all this. I'm going to be hopefully continuing with a bit of the jazz too. But I just felt like I needed a break from the jazz. Because I'm learning it in such a, I know I understand the classical theory pretty well. So for me, I'm at that, the level I've been explaining for the last hour or so is kind of where I'm at with the classical harmony. Like, I feel like I understand a lot more of the nuance there. With the jazz harmony, I'm kind of seeing it from such a one-dimensional perspective that I'm not seeing the nuances. I'm still getting used to the basic thrusts of what works where, and the sounds that I'm expecting to hear, in certain styles. And so it can be a little bit frustrating to do it all the time, because I feel like it lacks a lot of nuance that I'm used to with the other type of music. So when I'm playing classical music or listening to classical music, I'm thinking more about these little nuances. When I'm listening to jazz, I'm just like, I have no idea what chord that is. It's a lot more frustrating for me. So I need to do that in waves. I do occasionally feel very motivated to learn it. And I think it has helped me actually quite a lot in my understanding of harmony more generally, to have a different perspective. Anyway, I'll stop. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.